Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Office of Sponsored Programs Administration Closeouts webinar. My name is Tiffany Willoughby, Education Programs and Outreach Manager in the Office of Research. I will be your host. Joining me today are Emily Lacey, Associate Director in the Office of Sponsored Projects, and Natasha Hinton, Assistant Director in Research Financial Reporting. Together, they will discuss the procedures involved in closing a sponsored project. Emily, Natasha, welcome.
Thank you, Tiffany, and welcome everyone to the closeout process. So we wanted to give sort of a checklist and an overview of the closeout process for sponsored projects. Sponsored projects are very different from regular cost centers, and so we wanted to walk through everything that we do, all the reports that are required, the notifications that we send, and also just to show the breadth of what the closeout process entails. While there are 3 people on this panel of OSP, post-award, and finance, we also incorporate other areas. Sometimes we have to go and talk to technology commercialization or property or budget. The closeout process for sponsored projects is everything. So we will get right into it. So first, I tend to speak in a lot of acronyms because that is the grant world. And so we want to make sure that everybody is understanding the words that I'm using in our alphabet soup. So OSP is sponsored project. So that's my group. That's the pre-award process all the way up through the actual awarding of the project. Then we have OPM, which is the post-award management. That's Natasha's group. So everything related to post-award goes through them. Then we have AFR, which is accounting and financial reporting. This is Tracy's group. They're the ones who receive the money and send out the bills for the money. Principal investigator, this will be whoever is your cost center owner of the cost center. So that will be the technical person in charge of the project. IDC is indirect costs. These are costs that are necessary for every project and that we actually have a negotiated federal rate for, but that aren't directly attributable to the project. So this would be like the libraries, the facilities, the sponsored project staff, anything that is necessary in order to conduct the project, but that isn't specific to the project. Uniform guidance are the rules that we have to follow when we receive federal money. No cost extension is an NCE, and your SFO is your school fiscal officer. So now let's get into why should we worry about closeouts? And the reason is because uniform guidance, which are the terms and conditions that you agree to when you receive federal money, says that you have to. And uniform guidance says exactly what reports are due, when they're due, and who you need to send them to. And so it's important that you follow all these rules because those are the rules for accepting the money. If you don't follow the rules, then you may have to give the money back, and we don't want that to happen. So uniform guidance basically says that all of your closeout reports have to be submitted within 90 days. Now, a lot of the federal sponsors have made some requests that that be extended to 120 days. So you'll see sometimes that it's 120 instead of 90, but we will follow whichever one is based on that particular sponsor. So what are the consequences if we don't follow the rules? So these can go from bad to worse. There's not really a good scenario. It's only bad to worse. We'll go with the first scenario of a PI not completing their technical reports. That is what they are responsible for. So if a principal investigator just doesn't submit their technical report, maybe doesn't realize they have one due, or they just don't see the need of submitting one, they can have ramifications for themselves as a faculty. They may not get future awards, they may not get their next increment of funding, or they can also impact other faculty member. If they are on a project with another faculty member, that faculty member may not get any new awards or their next increment of funding because the behind faculty member didn't submit their reports. And NSF is the main one on this. They will not give any new money to anybody if anybody on the project team has an overdue report. So it's vitally important that those be submitted and turned in. The worst scenario in that case would be they say that we as a university are not following the rules and are not understanding our obligations, and so nobody at the university can get any funding. That is definitely the worst case scenario. Now, if we're late on any other type of reports, in addition to any technicals or just any of the reports in general, there are several layers of consequences that can happen. One of them is we could be listed as a high-risk grantee. And so this would be where they're basically labeling us us as someone who may not be able to follow the rules, who they can't trust. And so that carries with it a lot of consequences because people won't want to do business with us. And that's not just the federal government, but our prime subcontractors or even industry can see that we would be labeled as that, and then they may not want to give us money because they don't know if we are being fiscally responsible. Another thing that they could do is they could remove some of our expanded authorities. So right now we have expanded authorities where we can rebudget to a certain extent, we can move money around, we can request a no-cost extension and just have to tell the sponsor, but we don't really have to get approval. But that could all be taken away, and you can only imagine how much of a burden that would place if we weren't able to rebudget to a certain extent. So if you had to move $1, you would have to get permission from the sponsor. It would be a very big administrative burden. They could also debar us so that we couldn't get any federal money at all, which that would be an absolutely terrible case, and we certainly don't want that to happen. And so this just kind of tells you that the reports, while they may not seem important, they are important because they are a contractual obligation that we have to do. So let's move on to what exactly are the reports that we have to submit. So Tracy's group in accounting and financial reporting is responsible for the financial report. So this will be the final invoice and the final financial report. The final invoice will be the amount that is owed on the project. So everything that they have left to pay in order to complete the funding. The final financial report is a summary of the expenses that were on the project. They will submit both of those. Now they're going to wait until pretty much the last possible day to submit those because we want to make sure that all the expenses are accurate. We don't want to bill the government for something that wasn't supposed to be billed for, but we also want to make sure that all the expenses are on there as well. So during the closeout process, we'll work to get everything on the correct account. So we're going to wait to submit the final invoices just to make sure that everything is as accurate as possible. The technical report, we already talked about that. This is the PI's responsibility. This is the science. This is what did you do with the money? What new advances did you make? And these are important because if you've seen anything in the news over the past couple of years, you'll notice that sometimes congressmen and senators find interesting titles of research projects and they want to know why we funded it, like why did we study a snail shell? And so your technical report explains why, what was the benefit of that? Like maybe somebody was investigating their shell to see if maybe it could be used to help combat veterans and make their armor better. It's to justify what the money was spent for, what is the science that came out of it. And so it's important that the faculty member actually submits it and tells about what advances they've made, how it's helped. And that is the faculty's responsibility. We can help with identifying where to submit the report, what format it is, and who it goes to, but we can't write it because we are not the scientists. The final invention and patent report, that is going to be submitted by my office, and we will work with our technology commercialization office. This is where we will disclose any inventions, patents, technologies that came out of it. And, you know, the federal government funded this, so they want to know what inventions, what fundable, patentable ideas came out of it because it might be able to be used on other projects. Then we have the final inventory and property report. The Office of Sponsored Projects will work in conjunction with AFR to identify any capital equipment that was purchased. We also will reach out to property because generally on these forms, you have to have a tag number listed on there as well. And this is just so that the government knows what their money was spent for. It's not often that we have to submit a final inventory report, but it is occasionally. The contract release form, this is for contracts. This is not for grants. So if you receive a federal contract, this will be required. And this will be submitted by AFR because it is financial. It basically states that for this award, this is the amount of money we charged you for, this is the amount of money we received, and we release you of any further obligations. So like the final financial, you want to make sure that we're submitting this towards the end of the allowable time frame so that we can make sure that we are getting all of our expenses and we are going to get repaid for everything. We don't have anything erroneous on there because once we submit that form, we cannot ask for any additional money. So now let's move on to the workflow and when do you know these things are due and what are they? So at 120 days out, OPM will produce a list of all the projects that are ending within in 120 days, and they'll send that to me. And so I look through that list and I try to identify the projects that I know are going to be requesting a no-cost extension, or that I know are incrementally funded and there will be another increment coming, or if I know that there's some arrangement where we do think additional money is coming or additional time. We don't want to send out reminders to people of a project is ending if it's not truly ending. We don't want to cause confusion and panic. And so I will go through that and then I will send it back to post award, and they will use that spreadsheet, and at 90 days out, they will send an email to the PI and all the respective administrative staff saying that the project is ending and that they need to either begin the closeout process or request the no cost extension. And so if they need a no-cost extension, they should contact my office in sponsor projects and provide a rationale as to why they need the no-cost extension, how long of a time frame, and then my office will work to get that submitted to the sponsor and get it extended. If there is no cost extension being requested and the project truly is ending, then the closeout process should be beginning. And so that should be continuing through the 90-day period all the way through the end date and for 30 days after. And so what we mean by that is that the encumbrances are being cleared off, that the salary is not going to hit after the end date, that you're not buying any capital equipment on the last few days, that the deficits and overages are being corrected, and that it's basically getting down to a zero balance. That is the goal. 45 days after AFR takes over, and that is because after the 45-day period, there are no cost transfers that will be allowed. Everything that should have been moved onto there or should have been moved off has already occurred, and AFR takes over. So AFR is going to make sure that the account is accurate, that they don't see any errors or anything, that the IDC calculated correctly, all of those things. They'll also clear up any deficits or overages. At 90 days after the end date or 120 days after the end date, depending upon the federal sponsor, the AFR will submit the final financial report and the final invoice. So they'll get it submitted before the end date, and then you would think that would be the end and we could just close the cost center, but we have to wait until we get our last payment. The payment is the key. We can't close a cost center if we're still expecting payment. So we have to leave it open until that final invoice is paid. Once that happens, then we can move to the official closeout. And that's when AFR will notify post-award, who will notify pre-award in OSP. We will work, my office, the OSP office, will work in conjunction with all of these deadlines to meet any of the other reports that are due. So we will work behind the scenes at getting the inventory report or the invention report, and we'll also start contacting the PI about technical reports. I send a milestone notification through PeopleSoft, which it does look a little spammy, but it tells you exactly what you need, and it notifies the faculty member of their reports. I send them for all the reports, whether they be annual or final. I tend to send them about 2 weeks before they're due, 2 weeks to a month before they're due, and it lets the faculty member know that they need to submit their technical report. And we'll follow along behind to make sure we have copies of those, because we do have to have those in our file for audit purposes. They do need to be part of our complete record. And so we'll get those, and we will make sure that all of the terms and conditions are met, that we have submitted everything that we're supposed to, and that all of the cost center and all the contractual obligations have been met. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Natasha, who's going to go over some of the post-award aspects and give some examples of the emails that we send out. So Natasha, over to you.
Thank you, Emily. I will discuss what is a burn rate review. Part of the process that OPM handles is a monthly burn rate report to review all the sponsored projects that are ending, not spending, overspending, and other issues that may occur. As part of the burn rate review, OPM looks at projects that are ending in 90 days, projects that end in 90 days with a lot of available budget, new projects that have not been spending the first 90 days, projects with 0% spent, and projects that have expenditures but no budget. An example of projects that have expenditures but no budget could be a project that's in pre-award status. We allow some projects that are in pre-award to go ahead and spend 90 days prior to the begin date, and so expenditures will be incurred. Also, post-award management reviews a slow monthly burn rate where there's a large available balance. Cost centers that show up with multiple attribute changes could be, for example, a project that has a function update, say from instruction over to research, part of the review is to ensure that all the budget is moved to the appropriate chart field string. Any additional items could be noted if there's any discrepancies on the burn rate review. As part of the notification process from this burn rate review, like Emily mentioned, OPM sends a Excel spreadsheet to OSP to review for projects that are ending in 90 days. This list, once it is received back from OSP, is handled to start sending email notifications to the PIs, the school fiscal officers, the department AAs, and also accounting and financial reporting in OSP, so that everyone is aware that the project is ending in 90 days. Included on the email is information regarding the sponsor, the project end date, the cost center, the current available balance, as well as a snippet of budget overview. This will tell the PI exactly how much direct available budget that they can spend before the end date. And as part of the notification, it is very important that departments review their cost centers, ensure that all the encumbrances related to purchase orders are invoiced prior to the end date. One thing noted, the project cannot be closed out or invoiced if there's hanging encumbrances. I know one question has come up multiple times from departments as I read these emails is, I have an encumbrance out there, can we invoice the sponsor for it? We cannot, because the expenditure has not been incurred. Also included in the detail of the email is ensuring that all payroll is reviewed and all expenditures are charged appropriately. If there's any errors on the cost center, the departments process the appropriate forms, smooth the payroll off. Also, any purchase orders or receipts or travel expenditures, everything is charged appropriately. Also, one thing to note, account reconciliation. This is a good monthly review that departments should utilize to ensure that everything is handled in a timely manner and not at the end of the project where you're trying to clean up. Something new that we've included is there will be 2 attachments. One will be the financial reporting procedure for closeout so that all the PIs and the department is aware, and also a closeout checklist. And the checklist will go through items to handle such as the EPARs, purchase orders, things like that. Next is a sample of the Milestone email. This is sent by Emily and it is system generated. This is the email that she sends when the financial technical reports are due. The PIs will receive this so that they know that they need to do their reporting. Next, as Emily mentioned, part of the closeout process, once AFR completes their closeout of the project, notification is sent to OPM. And at that point, OPM will reduce the budget to actuals, they'll close the contract status, and then they will send notification back to AFR that the cost center can be inactivated. There is another group of AFR that handles the cost center inactivation as well as the project inactivation. Once they have completed this step, then an email will go out notifying you that the project's been closed and the cost center has been inactivated. One thing that I need to note, if the cost center is inactivated during the fiscal year, you will be required to do account reconciliation for the remainder of the year. Should something happen where a project is closed out and it shows up on account reconciliation, that usually is when there's another cleanup process that something may have posted, or if AFR has to go back in to clean any liability balances or anything that may have occurred. At that point, that will be a behind the scenes, and once it's cleaned up, the cost center will be inactivated again. For any additional information on closeout processes, on the research website, there's a link for the closeout project, and that gives a little bit more detail as far as the different steps. And then there's also the AFR process, which that closeout document is included in the email. The contact information for every PI, there's a grant specialist team member, and the link is below. And then for OSP, they have a general email, osp@utdallas.edu. And then for OPM, there's opm@utdallas.edu. And then for AFR, it would be Tracy Letter, the manager of AFR. And that is the end of the closeout process. We will go to any questions that we may have regarding the closeout process.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Emily. We do have a few questions in the queue. The first question is, what is the difference between a cost reimbursable and fixed price project?
So cost reimbursable is we receive our money after we spend it. So we're not going to, if we have a project that has $500,000, but we've only spent $450,000, we will only get the $450,000 because that's what we spent. So the invoices that AFR sends are going to be based off our expenses, and that's what we will be reimbursed by the government. They don't just send us a check for $500,000 and then you whittle away at it. We only get what we've spent. Now, fixed price is based on they're just giving you an amount and that's the amount you get. And so if the project costs more than that, too bad. You only get the amount that you said you needed to do the project. If it costs less, then you've actually made a surplus. So that would be in the case of if you said a project is going to cost $500,000, they would send you a check for $500,000 and then you would spend it down in the meantime, but your account would always have the $500,000 in it because we've already received that money. Now, some fixed price are milestones or deliverables driven. So if they were going to give you $500,000, but you had to submit a report every year over 5 years, and each time you submitted a report, you would get $100,000. So that would be a milestone driven fixed price and not necessarily all up front. There's a wide variety of ways that you can get a fixed price agreement, but the concept is that you get that amount of money and you don't have to submit an actual line item budget showing how you spent it.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily. Just 1 minute. We do actually have quite a few questions. Another question, if the project is fixed price, how long until the PI gets the funds in their research enhancement cost center?
I can take this one. If the project has been fully paid and all of the activity has ceased on the cost center, then my team takes the cost center after a 45-day mark, and you can expect to see some entries just adjusting. Typically there's some pennies that are outstanding. We clear all of those, and the transfer to the PI Research Enhancement Cost Center is the last journal that we do, and you can expect to see it between 90 and 120 days after the end date.
Thank you very much. What is the Research Enhancement Cost Center?
I can take that one. The Research Enhancement Cost Center is an operating cost center that is set up under the OEA level. This cost center receives, it's part of our IDC process, where the PIs receive 10% of their IDC return to that cost center. So it allows them to use that return funds for any research related activities. In addition, this is where, the balances of fixed price projects is transferred to. One note I do need to make: when balances for fixed price are transferred to the PI's Research Enhancement Cost Center, it is up to the department to do a budget journal to budget those funds so that they can use them.
Thank you, Natasha. What is the 45-day cleanup timeline for?
I can take that one. The 45-day timeline cleanup is to allow for any expenditures that are currently in process to be posted to the cost center, such as, for example, one-card expenditures that may be posting due to the timing of our month-end close. Also, any purchase orders where we have, we're waiting on the invoice to be paid to allow for that timeline. One thing I need to stress is this is not a time to start to do reallocations to try and fix things during this timeline. We highly recommend that any, as a project is, in process or active, that each month as part of the reconciliation process that you ensure that expenditures are being posted and that salaries are being paid, and that it's not a push at the end to get everything in, because there is a timing of reallocations when the EPAR is entered in on the HCM side to when they are posted over to the financial side. There is a timing delay, so that could pose an issue with when we go to start the closeout process. If not everything's posted and we have closed a project out, it could mean that expenditures have to be moved back off because they are unallowable.
Thank you very much. The next question, if I am transferring to another institution, what are my responsibilities in terms of UTD, notification, follow-up, documentation, etc.?
So I will take that one. So if you're leaving the university, first you need to make sure to tell your department head and your dean that you're leaving, and then we are probably the second stop that you should make in addition to your admins. We will set up a checkout meeting that we will discuss what to do, what projects you have, and what your plans are for them. So we'll also ask about any equipment that you're going to take, any inventions that you filed. We'll make sure that we understand what you want to do with your active projects. If you're going to be transferring them, if you're going to leave them here, if you're going to subcontract items back to the university. The closeout process is still the same. If you leave, you still have to, we will have to notify the sponsor, because we'll have to either transfer the active project to the new university, or we'll have to leave it here and move it over to another investigator. If you're just moving it to another investigator and you're not taking your award with you, your responsibilities pretty much end as of the day that the sponsor approves the request. Now, if you are taking the projects with you, one of the items, you'll have to submit some documentation. And for NSF specifically, they'll require you to submit 2 documents. One will be the progress that you've made on your project, and then what do you still have to accomplish. So this is the opportunity to state if any of your aims will change when you move to the new university, and any delays that you'll encounter. Right now, we're specifically asking faculty to make sure and tell about any delays experienced during the pandemic. But NIH requires some similar documents as well, but each sponsor has their own requirements, and so we just have to work with the individual faculty on what their active projects are, and then we'll communicate what our needs are. The biggest hurdle when transferring projects is the finances, because we need to submit the transfer paperwork early, because it could take 3 or 4 months for a sponsor to approve a transfer, and so that requires you to think ahead and put all of your expenses, all of your encumbrances, everything on the cost center well in advance. And then we have to kind of manually figure out what the IDC rate is going to be, the fringe rate, and we have to get the best estimate of that dollar figure, because that dollar figure is what we're relinquishing. And so at that point, that's the maximum amount we'll be able to get back from the sponsor, and then anything residual will be what transfers with you to the new university. So it's a very much a combined effort across all of the departments.
Excellent, Emily. And I believe that we do have a tag on to that question, and it does relate to equipment. So I think that you've answered some of this following question, but I'll state it as it is written. Along those same lines, if I have a research enhancement cost center that was created for leftover a pre-contracted amount, what happens to these funds and or equipment purchases from the cost center if I transfer to another institution?
So research enhancement funds, if the faculty member leaves, the research enhancement will revert to the dean of the school. The school basically takes over those funds. Now, if you have a conversation with your dean, you can see if you can negotiate a deal. You could see if maybe the research enhancement could be used to pay for any students that you're leaving behind. But that is a deal that would specifically have to be made with the dean and not our office, because the funds now belong to the dean. As for equipment, we do have to submit paperwork showing if there was any equipment purchased on the project, then we have to report it, and we have to state whether it's going with you, whether it's staying at the old university, and we just have to give them a heads up as to what's happening. Now, if you've purchased equipment that was on old sponsored projects, as long as there wasn't any conditions in the award that the equipment doesn't vest with us, then you're free. Those equipments will belong to the university. And as for whether you can move them to the new university, that's a conversation with your department head and your dean. You'll have to work it out between y'all to figure out whether they will approve you taking it to the new university. And usually this boils down to whether it's specifically just being used by you. In that case, the odds are probably good you'll be able to take it. But if it's something that your entire department is using, then they may not be as inclined to let you take it. Sometimes you can make a deal where you can pay for it and then take it with you, minus the depreciation, of course. But that is a conversation to be had with your department head and your dean. Natasha, do you have anything to add about research enhancement? I think I covered it.
No, you are correct. It does revert back to the school, so.
Alrighty, thank you. The next question is, Under expanded authorities, if we see that within a 45-day period after the end date, there will be a purchase that still needs finalizing, or there is an EPAR reallocating funds is still processing that change, can we still ask for a no-cost extension for 30 days or 30 to 60 days? Do you recommend that we keep you and the PI in the loop when we see this? And if so, who should we contact on your team?
I think this is kind of a two-part question. One about the actual expenses hitting afterwards, so I'll let the post-award people take that. But as for the no-cost extension, if the project has ended, you generally cannot request a no-cost extension, at least through the systems. And most of the federal sponsors have systems where we submit the request. If the end date has passed, we can't submit the request any longer. So a no-cost extension needs to be requested at a bare minimum 30 days before the end date. Some sponsors have a 45 or a 60-day requirement. And so that we need to have already submitted it because it could take them that long to approve it. But once that end date hits, the systems generally won't even allow you to submit it. If there was still the need for no cost extension, if it had ended, that would be a conversation for the PI to be making with his program officer about why it wasn't submitted on time. And just because an expense didn't hit is not a sufficient justification for a no cost extension. The no cost extension doesn't need to. A valid rationale is not, I need to use the funds. That should never be stated because that is an audit red flag, and that is not what the intent of an extension is for. An extension should be if something went wrong with the project or if you encountered delays. So like right now, we are in the perfect situation for no cost extensions because of the COVID pandemic. We have quite a few no cost extension requests being submitted because faculty can't access their labs. Other reasons would be like if your postdoc couldn't get a visa and couldn't get here on time, or if your grad student graduated, or if your grad student took another job, or your lab flooded, anything like that that's going to actually cause you to have a delay. It could even be as simple as my research didn't go the way I planned, so I'm kind of having to go down a different path, and I just like to use some extra time to meet some more objectives that I hadn't planned on. That can be a rationale, but just because my expenses didn't hit when I thought they would is not a sufficient extension request.
Thank you. And did you have anything to comment on this question, Natasha?
Emma is correct. I mean, when expenditures that haven't posted after 45 days, that puts us, post-award will generally push back and say, you know, we can't allow it to post because it does, you know, downstream, it causes issues on the closeout process and also being able to invoice a sponsor and ensure that we get the funds. So we are very tightly monitoring that and pushing back when we see items like that.
Excellent. Next question, do we need to clean up line item deficits after the end date?
Yes, I mean, post-award will clean them up when the projects close out, but to help with the process, departments are more than welcome to go ahead and submit a budget revision to realign the budgets. But that is part of once post-award gets notified from AFR that the project's fully cleaned out, the budget will be reduced to actuals.
Thank you. Next question, who do we contact for an NCE and what information do you need?
That would be mine. So an NCE is a no-cost extension again. So you would contact my office, whoever your grant specialist is, and you would need to get what will always be required for a no-cost extension is a justification as to why. And so it's the rationale that I provided earlier, where it's not just to spend the money, but what exactly happened that you need to use additional time, and the justification needs to be why you need the time and what you're going to do with that time. So it's not just my grad student, he went and took another job, but what do you plan to do to solve that problem? What are you going to be doing during the extension? And the extension can be anywhere from, you could just request a month if you need it, and it's generally all the way up to 12 months. Now, some sponsors have some different requirements, like CPRIT only allows a 6-month extension. The closer you get to the end date, the more information they're going to require. Some sponsors just require just the extension. That's it, a justification as to why. But once you get into second no cost extensions or closer to the end date, they may ask more questions like how much money are you going to have left over? What are your plans for that money? And for some sponsors, if you submit it too close to the deadline, they'll ask you, why didn't you submit this earlier like you were supposed to? And so then you have to have a rationale as to why it took you so long, and not just I forgot is not a sufficient justification. It needs to be something along the lines of, you know, right now we could use the pandemic as an excuse, but just because you forgot and you got busy is not really a rationale for why you couldn't follow the rules.
Thank you. Next question, will encumbrances be reimbursed by the sponsor?
No, I can just take that even though it's not really my area. If it's not an actual expense, then we can't invoice it. So an encumbrance is just something that's being held. It's an obligation that you have, but it's not an actual expense. So we can't invoice a sponsor for it, and they won't reimburse us for a cost that hasn't actually occurred.
Very good. It looks like I have two more questions. One is, can PIs contact the funding agency or program officer regarding funding by themselves, or should it go through your office?
PIs can contact their program officer at any point. Now, I would recommend that you contact us if you're not talking about technical details. Technical details, feel free to contact your program officer at any point. But if you're going to start talking about budgets or extensions or anything like that, it's best if you talk to us first so that we can give you some advice as to how to phrase what you're asking, and also to make sure that you're asking the right person, because the program officer isn't always the right person to ask about funding or about when will an award arrive. They may not know. Now, sometimes it can help to prod a program official if your award is late in coming, but usually it's our counterpart that the problem is residing with, and so we actually need to be the ones contacting. But I would just recommend, if it's not a technical problem, just contact us and we can tell you if we think it's a good idea or if maybe it should be us contacting our counterpart.
Excellent. Next question, is there a report that admin can run to show all cost centers and their end dates?
I'm going to let Natasha answer that one.
In the reporting console, AFR has built a report for sponsored projects that can be run by PI. And so that report will actually give all the sponsored projects and the end date information. Also, on account reconciliation, the end dates are in account reconciliation, so that information is readily there. But the reporting console for sponsored projects is a good report to use.
Thank you, Natasha. Can the prime institution hold the rollover funds to UTD after the budget period ends? And is there a condition stated on the subcontract for this?
I think that's a question about carry forward. So when we are a subcontract, part of the terms and conditions will be whether we're allowed to have carry forward approval. And that means if you're incrementally funded and you get your first increment of funding, if you have leftover money, can it just be rolled over into the next one, or do we have to get permission? So most agencies will allow you to carry it forward. CPRD is one of the examples that won't, but most of the time it's allowed to be carried forward. Now, whoever our prime is, like if we were getting a subcontract from Southwestern, they could make the determination of whether we had that approval as well, since they have it in their prime, or they could restrict it. Most universities, the large majority, will do whatever is in their award so that we get the same terms. There are some universities that do not grant you that and will be more restrictive on your subcontracts than they are in their prime. And we do try and push back on that because we feel that we should have the same terms that they have. Now, NIH is one of the sponsors that is being very strict on carry forward. And so they are looking more closely at how much money you have left over and why you have that much money left over. And so some of the prime contractors, like the universities that are subbing down to us, they are getting a little more strict on how they do their carry forward. Now, if the terms in the contract say that we are allowed to carry it forward, you can just carry it forward. There's no problem. But if it says that we have to ask for permission, then that's one of the things we'll address when we get the next increment. We'll make sure that the modification says that whether we get our carry forward or whether it was not approved. And if it wasn't approved, there's not really anything that we could do because it's up to them. They're the prime and they're the ones that make the determinations. Now, I do think a conversation should have been had between the two PIs at the respective institutions about why that decision was made. And the PI can always go and talk to their counterpart to see if they could reverse that decision. A contract is easily modified. It can be changed. Even if it says one thing, you can always change it. But we do have to go with what the actual contract says. So if the contract states that you can't have your carry forward, then you can't carry it forward.
Very good. Thank you, Emily. For project deficits, are the PI personally responsible, or will the university research cover it? So I think the question is, who covers the project deficit?
The department and the PI will need to make sure that the deficits are cleared. Part of the problem with closeouts on some of the delays is if a project has an overall deficit, we cannot complete the closeout process. So emails are sent to the PI and the departments that they need to move the expenditures off to one of the PI's cost centers.
Excellent. At this time, there are no additional questions. I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for sharing your time, talent, and resources. And if anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the presenters, and they will be happy to answer them. For additional information, please visit our website at research.utdallas.edu, and thank you.